Override that junction, or suffocate. The voice sliced through the chamber, like a scalpel, not shouted, threaded with the cold finality of someone who'd already made peace with both outcomes. Cadet Halen Straw didn't flinch as the Thalrexian instructor blinked twice, confused, his dual ocular ridges spasming in disbelief. Halen's hands, calloused from years on Europa's frostbitten relays, moved without hesitation. He knelt at the side panel, detached the neural coupling clip, and bypassed the faulty stabilizer using a conductive alloy stirrer he'd sharpened the night before. The hiss of oxygen reclaimers returning to cycle was nearly drowned out by the mutter of unprocessed shock rippling through the observation deck. A slow ripple of blinking overlays fluttered across the laser plasma displays overhead, a warning icon flashed, then vanished. "That," murmured Commander Braille Tessick from the upper gantry, his crimson robe curling slightly under the shift of artificial gravity, was not in the simulation parameters. He wasn't speaking to anyone in particular, just stating a fact that hung in the air like thick fog, unsanctioned, unexpected, and undeniably effective. The gallery of instructors watched silently as the cadets evacuated the simulation dome. A few exchanged looks behind clipped data masks. Braille, arms crossed behind his back, fixed his second iris on Halen Straw, the human who hadn't spoken more than 12 words in 3 weeks, but had just saved the Academy from running a real asphyxiation drill to its end. He logged the incident, then flagged it. 3 days earlier, the first human cohort had docked with Vanguard Academy's orbital halo. The arrival bay, all polished reflection tiles and diplomatic decorum, had been scrubbed spotless for the occasion. Banners from over 40 systems shimmered on curved display walls, their luminous filaments rearranging to acknowledge Earth's controversial seal. A gray continent stretched under a thin blue arc, stark against the golds and greens of its cosmic neighbors. Inside the command vestibule, Braille Tessick adjusted his talon gloves, the scent of bio-glass polish still lingering in the air. He eyed the incoming humans with the distant wariness one might reserve for unknown wildlife. Primitive chassis, unstable biochemistry, one of the Arunian instructors muttered, sipping from his internal hydration loop. Their cranial symmetry's off, too. You sure they passed the psych filter? They barely passed the threshold, Braille replied without looking. Europa Substation 6 sent one of theirs. Records say he refused a neural tether during cryo. Said he'd rather wake up manually than trust system sync. The Arunian's laughter was dry. Manual wake-up, what century is that? But Braille didn't answer. He was watching the way the human cadets moved, less fluid than the biotuned species, but not aimless, more like deliberate. As if expecting every corridor to betray them, Halen Straw didn't unpack his uniform first. Instead, he opened a worn leather satchel, removed 3 hand-drawn schematics, and taped them to the dorm wall, static layouts of air ducts, alternate power access, and zero-grav lift overruns. One corner bore the frayed edges of old thermal damage. He stood back, silent, then began dismantling the dorm's automated air handler with a flick tool. Behind him, his roommate, a glistening Veshan hybrid, watched with one eye ridge raised. "You do realize this place runs on Tier 6 harmonics, right?" the Veshan asked, snorting. "No systems unbreakable," Halen replied, voice low but certain. "Paranoid much, prepared." He didn't elaborate. The schematic fluttered faintly as the vent rerouted, airflow shifting, uncommanded. In the instructor's lounge, discussion thickened like coagulating gel. "They treat doctrine like suggestion," muttered Instructor Girval, watching Halen through the live feed. His psych red flagged hyper-reactivity to dependency protocols. "That's not a strength. It is on Earth," Braille murmured almost to himself. He tapped into the incident logs from Europa 6, a mining facility collapse, communications blackout, emergency generators failed, entire station held together by a teenager who rewired the fusion dampeners using melted insulation and a forked breathing tube. That teen had been Halen. The next morning, the cadets assembled for orientation Delta II, rows of crisp uniforms, all optimized for biothermal retention and low-grav posture, except the humans. Halen's was altered, slight asymmetry in the threading, reinforced knees, utility band wrapped not around his waist but diagonally, across his chest, less academy chic, more field improvisation. Earth's representation appears, Idiosyncratic, commented Chancellor Real Marn during the observation review. Style mismatch. No, Braille corrected, eyes narrowed. Philosophical mismatch. Real Marn raised a spectral brow. Do explain. Most species build assuming functionality. Earth builds assuming failure. Later that week, during Equipment Diagnostics 01, a staged AI misfire was embedded into the interface to test cadet adaptability. The Tharnan cadet froze, her fingers twitched on the synapse input. The Drelican simply waited, scanning the console for instructor override. Halen Straw unplugged the AI core, bypassed the input by hardwiring the diagnostic feed to the emergency manifold, and rerouted the display to a secondary visor mount, all without speaking. The station flickered, then realigned. No fanfare, just a nod, a movement toward continuity, not recognition. Instructor Vol muttered, "This is why Earth scares them. They don't try to fix the system, they assume it broke before they arrived." That night, Braille watched the dorm feeds again. One of the human cadets had scrawled, "No OTA run" on the mirror with a dried sponge tip. Another stripped her visor of its default UI overlays and replaced them with wrist-mounted toggles, manual only. Halen sat cross-legged beside a partially disassembled drone, threading a bypass circuit into a sensor core. No light, no tooltips, no guidance, just memory and movement. And somewhere, behind it all, the faint echo of Europa's collapse, a trauma that had baked distrust into bone. He didn't believe in redundancy, he believed in salvage. When the Academy Review Board convened to discuss behavioral anomalies, Braille Tessick stood slowly and uploaded 3 simultaneous screen captures, one of Halen rerouting the dorm's air system, one from the diagnostic override drill, and one frame from Europa's incident log. The boy standing in a collapsing control room, shoulders squared, holding a melted panel with bloodied hands. Cadet Halen Straw, Braille said calmly, does not trust systems. Real Marn scoffed, "And this is your point?" "That's not a mistake." He meant to miss. The silence that followed Cadet Narel's whisper could have shattered obsidian. Instructor Varn Thol didn't respond immediately. His 3-fingered hand remained frozen over the command strip, his gaze fixed on the slow-motion replay hovering in a heads-up arc above the command table. The simulation captured the human cadet, Tor Ven, taking aim during the coordinated perimeter exercise, then deliberately shifting his blaster just left of target, the energy bolt grazing a containment barrel instead. That deviation caused the simulated platform's structural grid to fault on its secondary tier, forcing a reroute of all synthetic units. The resulting cascade drew fire away from the extraction path, opening a window just large enough for the other cadets, 2 Drelicans, a Varric scout, and Halen Straw, to extract the target and escape under cover. Tor Ven's record shows tactical logic is suboptimal, Instructor Thol muttered finally, narrowing his dorsal lid. This maneuver contradicts expectation. It contradicts programming, Narel corrected, her tail flicking in thought. He disabled an advantage to create one. That's illogical, not if he knew the system was built for logic. No one spoke after that. The display flickered and dissolved. Across the campus, a gray haze had settled between towers. Weather control grids were recalibrating after a misfire in the high-altitude modulator dome. Light refracted at odd angles through residual cloud fragments, casting fractured shadows against the walls of the cadet training blocks. Beneath one of those shadows, Halen sat on a cargo crate with a rusted edge, flipping a torn simulation map in his hands. Lines hand-drawn in red graphite snaked across the wrinkled surface, notations curled into margins, crossouts, alternate paths. Small circles marked suspected dead zones. "You really think they're watching how we walk hallways?" asked Corin Vask, stepping down from the adjacent stairwell. His coat was zipped to the chin, hands buried deep in the fabric. "I feel like I'm being dissected every time I stretch my legs." "They're not watching how we move," Halen replied, eyes still on the paper. "They're watching where we don't." Corin studied the map. "You mapped drain hatches?" "I mapped everything they don't show us." "And what, you're expecting the floor to drop out?" Halen finally looked up. "I expect nothing to hold." Corin didn't laugh, though he wanted to. Something about the cadence in Halen's voice, flat, factual, made the humor turn bitter before it reached his throat. Inside the diagnostics wing, the instructors huddled around performance charts, confused. The human cadets scored lower in every standard metric: reaction time, tactical synchronization, interface clarity. But then came the anomaly logs: fault drill survivability, multipath adaptability, error recovery time. There the humans didn't just pass, they broke scale. One report noted Halen rerouting an entire mission sim through a degraded circuit node, using a physical graphite diagram and a borrowed wrench. Another showed 3 cadets ignoring AI-suggested paths, and instead triangulating exit routes, using distant echo timings from stepped floor vibrations. "They're introducing failure into stable systems," said Instructor Varn, claws tapping a slow rhythm on the display rail. "No," replied Commander Brawl Tessic from the far end of the room. "They're treating stability as temporary." At that exact moment, in the corridor outside the simulation lab, Cadet Jory Venn crouched over a malfunctioning access panel. Sparks flared as he pried it open with a blade meant for field ration containers. Inside, instead of the clean modular array he expected, he found a half-melted switch, signs of previous burns, and a torn slip of graphite paper stuck to the housing with sealant gel. Handwriting, coordinates, 3 letters, VTB VASC training block. "Who the hell left this?" he muttered, stepping back. Corin, standing beside him, leaned in. "That's Halen's code. It's not sabotage, it's prep." A siren whooped overhead. The next simulation had begun. Red lights blinked across the platform surface, and cadets scrambled to position. Inside the control bay, Instructor Val glanced at the list of modifiers and frowned. "Why is Simulation 14A running with 38% power constraints?" "Request override," replied a technician from the console. "Submitted this morning. Internal review flagged human deviation testing. Greenlit under Clause 17. Who submitted it?" "Anonymous." On the sim floor, the exercise began. All lights dimmed, gravity was staggered, weapon assists failed. A fog of static surged through heads-up displays. Non-human cadets hesitated, waiting for a system recalibration. The humans didn't wait. Tor ducked low and motioned a signal with 2 fingers. Halen rolled under a failing bulkhead and snapped a floor panel open, rerouting power manually. Cadet Lorm, one of the smallest in the group, used a thermal panel cap as a slide to pull a trapped Gelen teammate from an elevator shaft. None of them looked to the central guidance dome. None waited for direction. They didn't restore the simulation. They rewrote it. After 12 minutes, the lights rose. 5 species recovered, 1 didn't. The humans were already at the extraction point, building a static reflector from broken equipment, rigging a comm signal from a shattered drone's emitter. Inside the control room, the silence was different now. It wasn't confusion. It was the quiet of something being reconsidered. "Their entire doctrine," said Brawl finally, "is modular, like old architecture, layered for collapse." "Then we've been designing for the wrong variable," Val muttered, arms folded. "They're not flexible," Brawl said, staring at the replay. "They're recursive." Later that evening, as the moonlight glinted off the tinted windows of the instructor's wing, a new file was slid across a private node. No sender, no ID trace. It contained a request: proposal, simulate total system failure. No recovery prompts, no AI scripting, full environmental decay, observe human response. At the bottom, a 3-word handwritten message had been embedded in the metadata, hidden in the magnetic flow of the file's timestamp: build for collapse. "They're already moving," hissed Commander Brawl Tessic, leaning forward as the heads-up display fractured with static. "We haven't even issued the trigger code." The laser plasma grid flickered, casting stuttering light across the observation tier. What had been a controlled trial moments earlier now devolved into staged chaos. Simulated emergency lights malfunctioned. Door algorithms stalled mid-sequence. Comms jammed on all non-local bands. It was meant to simulate failure. The humans didn't wait to confirm. Cadet Ivan Droll was the first to vanish from sight. One moment he stood with the rest near the maintenance bulkhead. Next his gloves were wrist-deep in a gutted conduit panel, sparks trailing behind his elbows. The simulation's logic loop hadn't fully collapsed yet, but Droll had already bypassed the magnetic latch using a stripped thermal line, and was guiding 3 cadets through the unsealed hatch before the instructors even logged the breach. "This isn't improvisation," murmured Analyst Rethville on the upper level, her tone clinical. "It's expectation. They act," Brawl muttered, "like the system is always lying." In the sim chamber below, heads jerked in opposite directions. Alien cadets paused, analyzing, waiting for reactivation cues. The humans, already halfway into the substructure access tunnels. Relthos, the youngest of the Earth cohort, shoved aside an emergency ladder panel, meant for repair crew drills. It had never been tested under combat scenarios. He didn't care. Halen was right behind him, holding a snapped rail in one hand, eyes sweeping over failing light strobes as they disappeared down into the mechanical depths. Up top, a control node sputtered. Red runes bled into orange and flickered out. Instructor Val frowned. They skipped the primary escape route. They mapped the ladder wells from last cycle's waste evac schedules. Browl responded, a slow chill creeping into his words. They're not waiting to see if it works. They already believe it won't. Inside simulation subsector 9C, everything stalled. That was the design. Environmental systems choked one by one, deliberately. Temperature dropped below safe margins. Filters jammed on loop. Guidance drones lost telemetry. Instructor Terrell of the Kasari watched one of his cadets stand motionless, blinking at the failed UI feed on their visor. They won't move until they're given an override, he said, more to himself than to the group. Meanwhile, a human cadet wrapped a torn emergency blanket around a busted sensor node, muting the signal spike it emitted. Another snapped a heads-up relay from a disabled drone, rewired it, and slapped it onto their wrist like a crude map. The humans treated malfunction like weather, unpredictable but never surprising. Above them, a heads-up stream of incident logs bloomed across the review chamber. Time Index 44.1, 9.07. Cadet Ivan Droll reroutes entry access, using non-permitted tools. System compliance breached. 44.20. 12 cadets H. Straw and R. Thos descend into auxiliary ladder system. Simulation boundary exceeded. 44.21.03. Command uplink overridden by physical block. No AI requests received. Instructor Val spoke again, slower now. Why duct tape a biometric scanner? Heads turned. It was true. The lower east entry, blocked since initiation, now flashed open. The overlay confirmed it. The biometric panel had been taped over and physically shorted, tricked into default clearance protocol. A crude method, unpredictable, unorthodox. It worked, because humans assume their handprint won't be recognized when it matters. Browl said, quiet. So they make the scanner irrelevant. Elsewhere in the scenario, a secondary fail-safe was designed to activate artificial pressure zones and confuse navigation, but the human cadets had already stopped using the map overlay. Tor Ven had torn his down earlier, drawing rough layouts on his forearm with a waterproof pen. They were navigating with memory, manual signs, and metal taps against pipes for audio signaling. In the analysis vault, a side monitor tracked stress levels. Alien participants showed spikes, cortisol analogs, elevated thermal reactions, frozen decision trees. The humans, mild fluctuation, no panic curve. Instead, a steady climb in action density. Why are they accelerating? Murmured Rethville. They don't expect rescue, Browl answered. In subsector 9C, Relthos emerged into an open chamber strewn with simulated rubble. The exit route was designed to be unlocked via a control node at the chamber's center. Thos bypassed it. He didn't even look at it. Instead, he and Halen pulled a loose power housing from a non-functional wall mount and used the exposed charge relay to force the side panel doors apart. Friction scorched their gloves. Sparks bit into their sleeves. They moved anyway. Cadet Lorm, previously unremarkable, triggered a self-latching anchor line across the breach, using an old med clamp from a training kit. It caught, held, and gave the rest a handhold. None of it was rehearsed. All of it worked. In the briefing hall, lights dimmed, an encrypted file flashed on screen, and a command-level directive overlaid the feed. Summary: simulation parameters compromised. Human deviation patterns no longer qualify as anomalies. Reclassify behavior index. Anticipatory adaptive system rejection. No one spoke. Then, from the back of the chamber, Browl Tessic stepped forward. He tapped once, and the feed shifted to a paused frame. Halen Straw crouched under failing lights, hand on a broken vent, torchlight angled upward through a wall of steam. They function inside failure, Browl said, voice low, because they never trust success. He turned away. Update the doctrine. Whatever this is, it won't stay fake. Halen's voice was calm, not cynical. He didn't raise it, didn't rally the room. He simply spoke from the edge of his bunk, boots unlaced, Eyes on the exposed relay node he'd been stripping bare for half an hour. Around him, the others looked up. Not because he demanded attention, but because the statement wasn't theory. It was warning. Rel Thos dropped the multi-tool in his lap. You think they'll switch it mid-run? No, Halen replied, threading a copper bypass wire through a magnet coil. I think the sim will break before they do. Korenvaisk exhaled through his teeth, rising from the corner mat. So we prep like it's not a drill. We prep like it's sabotage, Halen said, sealing the relay plate with a salvaged vent screw. They didn't ask what kind. That was Earth's way. They didn't wait for systems to define threat types. They prepared for ambiguity. There were no training schedules, just failure assumptions. The humans worked late. They muted their room systems, disabled biosignal monitors, used pocketlight beams instead of station lamps. Every cadet rewired at least one standard SIM kit, converting emergency medpads into shock insulators, turning food heater coils into signal scramblers, modifying nav pucks into low-range perimeter beacons, with discarded visors stripped for prisms. When Halen knelt to check his visor that night, he didn't calibrate it. He shut it off, pulled the display node, wrapped it in cloth, and slid it into a duct vent behind his cot. No HUD? Rel asked. Halen didn't glance back. If you see the world through the system, you die when it closes its eyes. The next morning, Drill Nemesis began. Officially, simulated planetary evacuation under blackout conditions. Unofficially, a high-tier stress test cloaked in procedural noise, authorized only for species cleared to engage in field triage across collapse-tier colonies. Commander Bral Tessic reviewed the exercise from behind an amber console overlay, his digits fidgeting with a graphite stylus. No AI assist, no trajectory rails. SIM will be degraded at entry. Internal crew must adapt. Duration? Asked analyst Reth Vil. Until failure becomes collapse. He tapped the screen twice. The drill activated. Across the simulated landscape, a shell of fabricated terrain meant to mimic a dying colony. Buildings flickered into fragmented renderings, power nodes stuttered with false positive spikes, and evac corridors blinked open, then sealed randomly. Students scattered into assigned squads. Alien cadets adjusted their comm units, verified HUD inputs, and checked evac timers on their chest displays. Human cadets didn't check anything. Halen motioned with 2 fingers. They moved as one unit, tight, quiet, zero verbal sync. Half the squad carried reconfigured pouches. The rest wore belts stitched with non-standard compartments built from heat patch rolls. Rel tapped a panel, received no signal. Locked already. They'll jam the fallback too, Halen said. By phase 3, we'll lose grid guidance. You sure? It's not paranoia if it happens every time. They ducked into an access corridor, lined with vented ductwork. Rel crouched beside a flickering node and attached one of their modified signal diverters. The rest fanned out, each moving as if they'd memorized chaos in layers. Meanwhile, in the observation bay, the instructor logs began to populate. Phase 1 initiated. 30 seconds power irregularities normalizing. SIM delay within threshold. Phase 2, 2 minutes HUD anomalies increasing. Drone routing unstable. Phase 3, 3:15, unexpected signal interference. Atmospheric flicker detected. Commander Brow leaned forward. Did you embed solar data in the variables? No, replied the technician. That's external, unrelated to SIM architecture. Cross-check flare activity. Now, across the terrain, comm towers shimmered, then failed outright. Above the exercise dome, the orbital station's environmental stabilizers surged out of sync. Lights along the walls dimmed, and a vibration rippled through the floor, a resonance outside of programmed tolerances. A solar flare, real, not simulated. In a single burst, the outer telemetry arrays died. Drone support collapsed. Power bridges across the SIM grid snapped offline one by one. For every other species, panic struck. For the humans, it was confirmation. Inside the terrain's eastern corridor, Halen threw down a modified flare beacon. Its signal didn't transmit, but the infrared pulse marked the hallway bend with a pulsing rhythm. He checked nothing. He gave no orders. The team moved, silent and coordinated, sweeping west and vanishing through service duct shafts they'd pre-opened the night before. Alien cadets clung to corridors. They searched for backup commands. They stood still, waiting for course correction from an AI no longer responding. Instructor Val slammed his hand on the console. No data from human teams. All tracking nodes inactive. Disabled, Bral said under his breath. Val turned. They've gone off-grid? No, they went off-system. Analyst Vil spun her terminal display, pulling up pre-drill behavioral flags. Halen rerouted 4 secondary sensor nodes the night before. We thought he was optimizing flow. He was closing exits, Bral corrected, sealing them into analog territory. Below, nothing moved. The drones that had once patrolled the sim were now inert shells, flickering in sporadic bursts of static. Communications were silent. Heads-up displays showed only blank grids or scrolling error bands. Then a single flicker. Ping detected. Non-system echo origin. Human fallback relay medium. Infrared bounce via surface lens. They had repurposed a visor. It's not a message, Vil whispered, adjusting the stream feed. It's a marker. No, Bral said, standing still. It's a map. One signal, one pulse. All else, gone. They've gone dark. Val muttered, shocked. Intentionally, Bral confirmed. They never trusted the drill, so they prepared for war. Cut the filter casing. Don't sever the membrane. Rel Thos crouched beneath the gutted hydration bay, knuckles streaked with grime, breath sharp in his lungs. The water filtration unit lay half disassembled, its primary valve now reconnected to a braided breathing tube salvaged from a damaged training pack. Beside him, Corin Vask wiped condensation from a cracked readout, ignoring the red flickers. It hadn't meant anything for hours. Above them, the ceiling shook from another collapse. Dust flared through the stale air. No one flinched. They were 6 hours into blackout. No external contact, no light apart from wrist glow rigs, no system reboots. What had begun as a simulation had become survival, and the human cadets had transitioned without friction. Across the collapsed corridor, Halen Straw drove a rusted coupling bar through a warped beam and jammed it into the base panel of an environmental duct. Each movement was deliberate. A fallback gravity anchor needed mass, anchor and counter resistance. The duct would hold. The bar, reinforced by tension lines, would stabilize the floor slant beneath the emergency shaft. Rel's voice came again, muffled by the cracked airflow tunnel. Oxygen reclaim starting. Not much. Just enough, Halen replied. Eyes still on the pipe he'd rerouted. We don't need comfort. We need hours. The others didn't question it. In failure, no one asked for guarantees. Behind the evac chamber, Cadet Ivan Droll perched on a scaffold of fused pipework, angling a shattered visor lens toward the last reflective panel they'd salvaged. The signal would bounce, if the angle held. He tightened the mount with a stripped rail clip, wiped the sweat from his brow, then tapped twice on the frame. No response. That was expected. He adjusted the timing module again, syncing the makeshift comm burst with the cadence. Halen had rigged into the life support conduit, 2 pulses short, 1 long, 4 repeating. Not a code pre-written by any system. A pattern invented by hand. The humans moved without announcement. Tasks were picked up mid-step. Someone would vanish to recover fractured beam shards and return with a full-frame arc, now twisted into a portable stretcher frame. One cadet removed boot soles to layer gaps in the sealant around the decomp chamber. Another redirected vent residue into coiled blankets, storing humidity for when filters eventually failed. There were no orders, just instincts honed by failure. Corin's fingers bled as he twisted the last tie onto the corridor beam. The extraction rig stood upright, leaning but stable. They would use it to pivot the bent frame away from the exit shaft, enough to wedge a crawl space through. Lorm and Jory secured the base, driving pipe ends into the fractured composite with a stone hammer built from a ripped stabilizer and sealed ballast. The air grew thicker, hotter. Oxygen levels dipped. Not dangerously yet. Do we signal again? Rel asked from beside the support beams. No, Halen said, tapping the conduit once. We let the code run. He had no watch, no readout. The rhythm was kept in his head. Every few minutes he pressed the relay again, 2 short, 1 long, 4 repeat. Somewhere above in a sealed command post, those pulses would reach a passive sensor. Infrared couldn't transmit a voice, but it could draw a line. If anyone was still listening, Droll returned with a bent wire loop and dropped it beside the entry panel. North sector completely buried. Then this is it, Halen said. One direction left. They moved toward the partial collapse. Beyond the bulkhead, a corridor dipped into darkness. The map no longer existed, not the simulated one, not the real one. They worked from memory, from training scars left by a dozen other failures Earth had given them. Jory lifted the frame with a grunt. The rig held. Corin shoved a panel aside, sparks tracing his sleeve. He didn't blink. They slipped into the tunnel, one by one, until only Halen remained, crouched beside the conduit. He tapped it again, then followed. 12 hours later, the rescue crew breached the south shaft. The structure had partially collapsed. Gravity stabilization was offline. Temperature fluctuated in waves. AI guidance had failed at every level. The drill had long ended. They expected bodies. They found infrared beacons wired to makeshift reflectors, hand signals etched into wall soot. One by one, they uncovered cadets, 37 total, sheltered in reinforced collapse pockets, each built from scavenged frame structures and lined with insulation pulled from failed drones. Breathing packs had been fashioned from water filters and med tubes. Light came from visor prism tricks, and pulse static redirected from crushed relay panels. Not one human had stayed where the system instructed. Not one had perished. The final signal came from beneath a sealed stairwell, where a conduit still beat out the same rhythmic pattern. 2 short, 1 long, 4 repeat, written by calloused fingers into failing steel. There was no log entry for it. No AI script could replicate it. Only a name scratched into the pipe, in small angled print, H. Straw. Pull up the footage. All of it. Unfiltered. Vice-Chancellor Tavor's command echoed across the tribunal rotunda, his dual mandibles clicking together at the base of every syllable. He stood in the central channel of the inquiry floor, ceremonial cape discarded, uniform collar opened, not by protocol, but by necessity. His upper eye ridge twitched under the indirect light, bouncing from the curved walls. The weight of institutional silence had grown too dense to ignore. A dozen senior instructors shifted in their arc-tier seats. The room was unusually warm, even by Zenthari design standards. The atmosphere regulators were set low, a gesture of austerity. Some believed it was punishment. Commander Brel Tessic stepped forward, activating the central beam relay. The room dimmed. The heads-up display flared to life in sharp vertical strands, splitting into a 6-screen mosaic. Each frame displayed a different angle from Drell Nemesis, the onset, the blackout, the flare surge, and the aftermath. Footage from Corridor 4E showed alien cadets standing immobile, heads tilted toward blank interface panels. Some called for response codes. Others stared. One Drellican repeated the same phrase 6 times in 3 minutes. Requesting override. AI, confirm, requesting override. The humans were already gone. Another frame depicted the manual gravity rig, the rusted support bar trembling with the strain of the beam beneath it. The structure held. Then came the oxygen siphon from the filtration core, still functioning when the recovery teams arrived. Pause here, Brull instructed. The screen froze on an overhead view of Cadet Jory Venn duct-taping a biometric scanner with a heat pad and graphite band. This override wasn't in their assignment. It wasn't even in our SIM infrastructure. That scanner had no fallback logic. Vice-Chancellor Tavor said nothing. From the left sector, Instructor Val cleared his throat with effort. Are we acknowledging full divergence? No, Brel said. We're acknowledging philosophical incompatibility. Across the tribunal floor, murmurs began, a hum of divided thought. One by one, instructors turned to their data reels. Some cross-referenced protocols. Others simply stared at the screens as if waiting for something more explainable to appear. The tribunal clerk input the next report log. Incident review, drill Nemesis participant species, multi-result, 37 lives saved, 0 human casualties, human participant strategy, full system rejection, fallback substitution, analog adaptation. Tavor's voice broke the silence again. Explain to me why the highest fail rate cohort in our entrance protocol was the only one to predict systemic failure across all tiers. Reth Vil, standing near the central spire, finally spoke. Her voice was dry, slow, because their doctrine doesn't define error as exception, it defines it as default. The screens began auto-cycling through off-mission visuals, Relthos using a cracked beam as a lever, even Droll crouched beneath a relay panel, headlamp bouncing against his forehead. Halen Straw scribbling pattern pulses into the dust on a pipe with a graphite stub while others ran cables. One clip showed an alien cadet sobbing quietly beside an unresponsive wall display. I waited, he whispered to the interview log. It said to wait for guidance. I waited. Another. They moved so fast, no signal, no callouts, just motion. We didn't know if they had orders. Turns out, they had none, just plans. The final clip cut in, silent, raw. A destroyed training manual sat open on a metal floor, torn edges, cover warped, written across its margin in uneven print. If the system fails, be the function. Tavor's mandibles stopped twitching. He turned toward Brawl. Did we teach them to survive, or to obey? Brawl answered without hesitation. We taught them how to function when things work. Earth taught them how to live when nothing does. From the rear of the room, Chancellor Rel Marn, once one of Earth's most vocal skeptics, leaned forward, brows low. You're suggesting we rebuild doctrine based on failure logic. I'm not suggesting anything, Brawl replied. I'm stating that your current doctrine failed 37 lives. Another silence followed. This one was deeper, slower. No one touched a panel. No one shifted. Instructor Val finally exhaled. So what do we do? Tavor's fingers traced the curve of his Tribunal badge. We rewrite. No system assumptions. Vil asked. No passive failovers, Brawl added. No reliance on AI pathing, came Val. No primary trust structures, Rel Marn muttered. Tavor turned toward the clerk. Open an override directive. Effective immediately. Simulation frameworks are to be reviewed, redrafted, and rebuilt, under human oversight. Human, Val blinked. Who else knows how to teach collapse? Later that evening, when the rotunda emptied, Brawl remained behind. Alone, he approached the Tribunal archive door. The interior lights were off. He reached into his coat and pulled a scorched copy of Vanguard's Tier 1 survival manual, pages annotated, scratched, rewritten in several hands. He placed it on the Tribunal shelf and walked away. A minute later, a junior clerk entered and found the book. Inside the back cover, a single sentence had been pressed into the paper with a stylus, not written but engraved. Don't wait to be told the system is dead. Assume it is. Strip it. No tech. Just hands and memory. Halen Straw's voice carried no anger, no challenge. Just instruction. The amphitheater's silence absorbed it like dry stone. Across the staging floor, a dozen cadets, human and alien, stood uncertain before sealed gear crates. Above them, alien instructors lined the oversight gallery, arms crossed, datapads idle. Some watched with concealed scorn, others with silent calculation. No one moved. Then a Zirani cadet cracked the crate's seal. A toolkit clattered to the ground. No tablets, no command chips, no overlays. Only mechanical wrenches, signal coils, fiber spools, insulated blades, and graphite sticks bound in thin rope. The cadet's facial ridges twitched. This is a joke, muttered instructor Hav Sen from the upper tier. Brawl Tessic didn't look at him. His gaze was locked on the floor below, where Halen moved from crate to crate, nodding once at each cadet who complied. The drill begins in 3, Halen said, his words steady, unaffected by the simmering disdain overhead. They're not ready, Hav snapped, stepping forward. They're scholars, not field scavengers. They're survivors, Brawl replied, eyes still fixed on the cadets. They just don't know it yet. The walls of the new training wing were still unfinished. Patching tape lined the upper vents. The floor was reinforced with dual-grip mesh, the kind used in gravity-variable vaults. The scent of ion-treated steel still clung to the lower platform, not from decay but from disuse. This section hadn't hosted drills in years, not since the system had evolved past what it called manual redundancy. Now that redundancy had become doctrine. The lights dimmed. A red band blinked across the upper wall. The simulation began. Heads-up displays failed on entry. Environmental cues misfired. No lights, no markers. The students froze, just long enough for confusion to root. Then the humans moved. Rel Thos crawled beneath the staging panel, drew a schematic on the floor with graphite. Corin Vask mapped signal returns from the wall conduit, using a stripped coil clamped to his shoulder. Jory Ven counted air circulation pulses through the grating, calibrating movement with his wrist as a pendulum. Halen said nothing. He walked. A Drelican cadet hesitated beside the deactivated map display. "What are we supposed to do?" "Don't fix it," Halen said without slowing. "Replace it, from the outside." The cadet blinked. "With what?" "With what you brought," Halen answered. The Drelican looked down. No interface, just rope, wire, a dull-bladed cutter, and 4 strips of cloth used for grip. His face twitched with disbelief. Halen kept walking. Above them, Instructor Sen scoffed. "This is unnecessary extremism. It's contingency discipline," Brawl corrected. "Every second they wait for help is a second they die." The cadets split into pairs. The human-led teams reorganized by spacing, not by assignment. One handled floor contact. Another tracked internal pressure variance. They formed a triangle formation around the collapsed corridor, one cadet hammering a Pathfinder spike, with a ration pack casing until it embedded deep enough to anchor a pull line. A Zenthari cadet knelt beside a damaged panel, confused. A human slid beside him, offered a thermal wrap, and began twisting fuse knots into a bypass loop. The Zenthari mirrored him. No words, no hand signals, just rhythm. Inside the control booth, the lead examiner tilted his head. "They're not using verbal protocols. They're operating in silent mode," Brawl said. As requested, another instructor leaned in. "You knew they would adapt." "No," Brawl replied. "I knew they wouldn't stop." Below, the scenario evolved. The simulated roof collapsed, triggered by a delayed environmental fault. The team didn't scatter. Instead, Jory rerouted the structural weight, using a lever made from a light rig mount, and a toolkit case wedged under a stair brace. The alien cadet with him grabbed the opposite end, eyes wide, no hesitation. Later, when the ventilation shaft flooded with carbon mist, the human team rerouted airflow by cracking a floor grating and tying soaked cloth from their emergency wraps into crude filters. They dragged 2 cadets through, using belts as guidelines, their breaths shallow but controlled, no alerts, no instructions. Each act followed from a core assumption: the system would fail, and survival would begin where structure ended. After 22 minutes, the drill stopped. The lights returned. The smoke cleared. All cadets accounted for. 9 non-human cadets approached Halen without being prompted. One offered a nod. Another extended a scrap of graphite. A third asked, not for tools but for diagrams. Up in the gallery, Instructor Sen stepped back. "They've abandoned structure." "No," Brawl said, folding his arms. "They've rebuilt it." The following day, a new directive circulated across the academy. Effective immediately, all advanced survival modules will include contingency-first methodology. Standard issue tech to be replaced with analog fallback kits for Week 1 cadets. Field instructor assigned H. Straw, provisional, course title, Post-System Recovery Operations. From now on, no plan begins without its failure mode. Vice-Chancellor Tavor's voice echoed across the chamber floor, not amplified, not rehearsed, just spoken with the weight of decision. The council broadcast, once a formality, now carried actual consequence. Heads-up displays across allied academies blinked in real time. Dozens of species, civilian, military, academic, watched from orbiters, relay ships, learning domes, and silent bunkers. This wasn't a vote, it was acknowledgement. Below the council's inner ring, the first formal record stamped into the Inter-Academy Doctrine Archive scrolled in measured pace across a sidewall laser plasma panel, initiating transfer of curriculum protocols. Origin Doctrine, Human Contingency First Operation Logic. Foundational pillar: no system must be trusted with your survival. No one spoke as the seal imprinted. In a dim chamber 2 floors below, Halen Straw stood before a low table with a single sheet spread across it, creases deep, corners weathered, edges scuffed. The blueprint was hand-drawn. No overlays, no simulation markers, It mapped an endurance path through sealed sectors of the Academy's hangar vaults, accounting for environmental instability, reclaimed hydration waste, and structural inconsistencies. "It's messy," Corin Vask muttered, looking over Halen's shoulder, "and brilliant." "You say that like the two are separate," Halen replied without looking up. 3 hours later, Corin led a squad of mixed-species cadets into Vault B, a sealed module, with no power and no water supply. Each wore analog chronographs. Each carried dry ration packets, coil-tied bandages, and a folded page of notes. No data pads, no automation. The Endurance Challenge had one rule: remain operational for 12 hours under simulated pressure loss, sensory interference, and no direct communication. Only infrared signals and recorded knocks allowed. The alien cadets had objected. Some privately, some in full complaint, but they came anyway. Inside the vault, the first sign of stress showed at hour 2. Thermal regulation failed. One Drelican began to panic at the shifting breath cycle. Corin dropped to one knee, drew 2 fingers across a strip of floor sand, then tapped twice on a grating with his boot heel. The alien cadet mirrored him, pulse slowing. No protocol shared, just a rhythm remembered. Back in the observation wing, Instructor Vol, now part of the Reform Oversight Committee, reviewed the silent footage. His posture was different than months ago, less combative, more still. "They've begun shaping the others," he said. "Through method," Brawl added, arms crossed behind him. "Not authority, unstable methods," muttered a council envoy. "No," Brawl replied, uncomfortable, "because it makes you admit nothing is guaranteed." Later, after the vault test ended with full team retention and 0 flags raised, each cadet was issued a sealed kit, not ceremonial, not ornamental. Inside graphite, water twine, flare clips, and a blank journal. The note at the bottom read, "You'll record your own failure drills. No one else will prepare for you." Across the upper decks, internal memos began to circulate. Avari Academy requests 3 human doctrine observers, Jiran Command Base, to host fallback field ops, led by Earth Cadets Helio. Class D-17 requests direct training under H. Straw Protocol Group. What had started as ridicule turned to study. What had been study became implementation. In the northern wing of the Academy, a new archive display was installed. Behind the security glass rested a single sheet of paper, creased, yellowing, hand-inked. The original schematic Halen had drawn in the dorm vent during drill Nemesis prep. A small brass plate sat below it. "The first human doctrine, if it works now, plan for when it doesn't." Later that cycle, in a private summit between planetary education chairs, Vice-Chancellor Tavor spoke again, his final words broadcast only once, archived in uncut feed form. "You built for efficiency, for harmony, for continuity. But control cannot be your only plan. If you do not prepare for its absence, then all you've built becomes a house waiting for its fire." That quote, by cycle's end, was etched into the walls of 6 academies. On Earth, it was painted in bold charcoal strokes across the side of Europa Substation 6, and beneath it, a child's name, scratched into the corner beam with a blade tip, Halen Straw. "Don't look for where the answer is. Look for where it breaks." The phrase wasn't on the syllabus. It was never part of the drills, never coded into academy curriculum. But it was spoken now, first in quiet corners of prep vaults, then during strategy rotation briefings, and eventually by instructors themselves, before they initiated fallback drills. No one ever quoted it formally. They didn't have to. Everyone knew whose words they were. The day the new cadets arrived, the courtyard had changed, not dramatically. There was no monument towering overhead, no dramatic bust or preserved uniform in glass. Instead, just off the southern flank of the orientation dome, surrounded by a ring of blackstone tiles, stood a single visor, cracked. Its inner lens still scorched along the right edge, just enough to distort reflection. Etched along the rim, in carbon-laced script, was a string of faint notches, 2 short, 1 long, 4 repeated. The pulse code. No plaque explained its presence, no voice announced its purpose, and yet, every cadet, regardless of species, station or rank, walked past it slower than anywhere else on campus. Some touched it. Others simply turned their heads as they passed, lips moving with a name never shouted in ceremony. Halen Straw. The system didn't record his graduation, no academy medal bore his ID. His name wasn't attached to council rulings, nor was his face captured in official training footage. He didn't give speeches, he didn't submit doctrines, and yet every system changed. Inside Classroom Sub-2, a Zerani instructor, once openly skeptical of Earth's methods, now began sessions by powering down every interface node. The first 15 minutes were conducted in darkness, broken only by the scratching of graphite and the tap of pen against wall. Students were expected to build their own fallback sequences. No answers provided, no tech assistance. In the updated simulation wing, Corridor 5A had been renamed informally as the Loop. A sealed hallway, with no digital readout, it was where silent mode exercises began. Cadets were expected to complete the entire segment with improvised tools and non-verbal coordination. It wasn't mandatory. Yet no one opted out. On a training vessel orbiting a fringe moon, Corin Vask led a mixed group of exchange cadets through what had once been considered a punishment endurance. No rations, no signal, full blackout, 20 hours in a gravity-variable hull. The final hour was always the same, every participant tasked with leaving behind a marker, one that could survive system loss. They stopped leaving data logs, they left symbols, a line, then a pause, then 4. Tavor retired his chancellorship quietly. No public address, no farewell summit. In his final recorded internal log, he left behind a single directive: abandon the worship of control. If a method depends on nothing failing, it is not a method, it is arrogance. The phrase now opens every interstellar training broadcast issued by the Academy Alliance. On Earth, Substation 6 remains operational, barely. It's not a high-tier facility. The halls leak steam in winter, the outer sealants need replacing. The mess hall uses hard lights now, but the core vents still rattle when the generators shift. The dorm where Halen first mapped fallback paths was never reassigned, no one requested it. Inside, the wall still bears the torn schematic, laminated cracked along the corners, faded by recycled air. Beneath it, carved directly into the insulation wrap with a blunt knife: if you must survive, you must assume nothing. The Galactic Councils adapted slowly. Some protested, others demanded simulations remain clean, efficient, system-aligned. But their cadets, those who walked the halls where the visor stood, already moved differently. They bent protocol, they rewrote drills, they trained with broken maps and sealed visors, and walked corridors in silence. When pressed, one cadet said it simply: "We're not trained for systems anymore, we're trained for when they leave." In time, Earth's methods stopped being controversial. They became foundational, not through diplomacy, not through rebellion, but through survival that outlasted doctrine. What began as a contingency became a creed, and what began as a quiet dropout from a collapsing substation became a name whispered at the threshold of every analog exam. When the lights dimmed, when the systems cut, when the room demanded improvisation, a whisper, never loud. But loudness was never the point, not in the vent shaft where he rewired oxygen from melted wires, not when he crossed a blackout corridor with a cracked lens wrapped in cloth, not when he bypassed an entire generation of failure by building for it first. He wasn't loud, but every system now whispers his name.